Hello everyone, I am Billy of SpeedForce Productions and welcome to another game review on Gaming Saturdays. And we are continuing with the mini childhood games marathon. And we are now moving on to our second game, being the 2000 release for the PlayStation, Sega Dreamcast, Nintendo 64 and the PC, being none other than Spider-Man. Let's do this, shall we? Now, I love Spider-Man. I have been a fan of the Spider-Man series longer than I have been fans of things like the Sonic the Hedgehog series. I always watched the 90s cartoon along with the MTV series when I was just little. I've always watched all of the Spider-Man movies, and I'm pretty excited for the upcoming Into the Spider-Verse movie. And of course, I've played some of the Spider-Man games, mainly the 3D ones. I haven't touched one of the ones before the jump to 3D, apart from Spider-Man Return of the Sinister Six, which, I'm not gonna lie, was pretty shit of a game. What do you expect from a game made by LGN who started off making toys before they made games? Oh wait. So the game, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be looking at is the game released in the year 2000, being the first 3D Spider-Man game. Many gamers see this game as a classic video game, and one that will live on as one of the greatest things related to Spider-Man. I actually played this game more than I've played games like The Simpsons Hit and Run, along with 2 games after this one. I think it was either this game, Spyro the Dragon, or Pokemon Generation 1 Blue version were my first ever video games. I'm not sure which one was the actual very first, but I'm sure it was one of those 3 games. You're probably wondering why I'm not going to be doing a review on Spyro and Pokemon. Well, Spyro I didn't have much memories with, seeing as I didn't play it much. And Pokemon, well, have you seen the shit Nintendo can do to people on YouTube? Until they can get their shit together, I'm not reviewing anything Nintendo. And for those who are wondering, yes, the whole Spyro thing I'm doing, I will probably do a review on Spyro in the coming future, maybe just before the remastered game comes out. Just wait and see. So how about we get into the game we're supposed to be looking at? This is my review on Spider-Man 2000, and I'll be looking at the PlayStation version. So the story begins with Doc Ock giving a speech on technology and how he'll use it for the good of the world. Pfft, yeah right. When someone tries to ruin the event backstage, revealing it to be Spider-Man?
Last time I checked, I was Spider-Man.
This is actually a fake Spider-Man. Someone who is actually pretending to be Spidey so Spidey can get the blame. Eddie Brooks sees this and quickly takes photos of the fake Spider-Man committing the crimes at the event. But he gets his camera destroyed and starts worrying about his career and transforms into the big symbiote monster himself, Venom. Later on, the whole of New York City is covered in strange fog, and it's up to Spider-Man to save the whole of New York and stop whoever is behind all of this before it's too late. Being the first 3D Spider-Man game, it makes sense for a story like this. If I'm correct, I think the game developers wanted to make it feel like the comics, which I can see, although it can come across as cheesy. Sometimes in the story, Spidey meets up with either past villains from the comics like Rhino, Scorpion, or Mysterio, and of course Venom. He even meets up with other Marvel superheroes like Captain America, the Human Torch, or Daredevil. That's pretty cool, but it doesn't really add anything to the plot. They don't help out Spider-Man throughout the whole adventure. They don't join in to help Spidey battle any of the villains. Clearly the main parts of the whole story was centered around Spider-Man and Venom, and they have good moments together actually. Voice acting is pretty good. The people who voice the characters in this game really fit their characters as they play as. I have to say, I really enjoy hearing Spider-Man's voice in this game, just like how I think Josh Keegan is the best Spider-Man voice out of all of the Spider-Man TV shows, even Tom Holland in the live action films, but I still have a soft spot for Tobey Maguire. I discovered that the person who voiced Venom is the same person who voiced Cosmo in The Very Odd Parents. That blew my mind when I found that out. Imagine hearing Cosmo's voice on Venom, or Venom's voice on Cosmo. That would be weird, but funny at the same time. And of course, we can't forget about the Stan Lee cameo. He's a narrator at the beginning, and I really love hearing his voice. I never skip the moments where I can hear his voice. I hope he's going to be okay after what's going on with him at the moment. Dark times are coming. Now, how's the gameplay? Well, being the first Spider-Man game, it is pretty simple and laid out nicely. You take control of Spider-Man. You get to wall crawl, fight bad guys, web up enemies, and of course, web sling. Although the web slinging in this game is very outdated comparing to the later Spider-Man games, which have made the web slinging a whole lot better. Well, not all of the games at least. Spider-Man can only do 2 swings, so if he's very close to the next building or wall, he can take it slow, but if it's a bit further away, he'll go faster and to the closest one, of course. Sometimes he goes faster to the nearest wall, but doesn't quite make it, so make sure you hold the joystick up to make sure you can make it. I had to learn that when I was younger. The combat is pretty simple, mainly for newcomers, and again, being the first 3D Spider-Man game. You can either kick, punch, or use web attacks to take down enemies. These enemies are pretty easy to take down and easy to avoid their attacks. Web attacks Spidey can do are pretty cool. You can web the enemies up, which can kill them. Oh, I think Spider-Man has gone dark now. His webbings kill people now. He can even put webbing on his hands to make more damage. He can even make a little web ball to shoot at enemies, and can even go into this shield which can explode. That's pretty fun. The webbing is really fun to do, but it's limited. On the top left is the health meter and the web meter. Next to the web meter is your web cartridges, which can only hold up to 10 cartridges. I was fine with that, as it's not often I run out of webbing anyways. Plus, it stays true to the comics of Spider-Man, having web cartridges instead of infinite webbing like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies do. You can even use a targeting system, which is pretty helpful. You can use it to web sling to part of the level or to web objects, although it's mostly to web to the other part of the level. Spidey can also pick up objects and throw them to enemies, and it can even help on taking out enemies, but sometimes it can be a bit tricky pulling it off. The levels are pretty nicely done. The levels may be linear, but again, for Spidey's first 3D game, you can let that slide. When you're on the rooftop sections of the game, you can't see the ground below. This is used in the plot, as they mentioned that New York gets covered in fog. I have to say, that's a nice touch, although the next game didn't explain it in the plot, yet it still had it though. When you're in the levels that aren't on the rooftop, you'll have to be inside of a building or underground to either progress further into the story or to fight off one of the few boss fights. The normal level ones have you looking for the closest exit or doing a task, like in the first building level, you have to save hostages, take out the bank robbers, and stop a bomb from blowing up by putting it in a vault and shutting the door. Alright. I seem to have noticed that this game has a passion for buttons and switches, as there is a lot of them in this game. Sometimes you might have to do a puzzle with them in order to get through more of the game. Well, at least it keeps the game going on longer than just being a short game. The enemies start off being easy and later on get harder and longer to hit. That's a pretty common thing with these kind of games, and that's something I like. If a newcomer gives the game a try, it'll give them time to improve for the later part of the game. And there's other games I haven't tried yet, and I hope they do a similar thing. The boss fights are pretty good. When you get to them for the first time, they are pretty challenging, but after a few times, dying from them, the boss fights will get easier to do, or just watch someone's playthrough to know on how to take them down. You can even collect comic books throughout the game, and you can view them in the comic book collection inside the game. And they give a description of the comics themselves. You can even unlock bonus costumes for Spidey to wear in the game. You can also take part in the training minigame and do different things like taking down enemies or breaking targets. I find it funny how when it's over, you get a 360 view turning, making it feel like the Matrix. Well, to me anyways. Graphically speaking, if we were in the 90s still and graphics haven't advanced to what we can see it as today, this game would still look really great. Seeing as this is not the 90s and graphics have advanced, I'd say the world that the characters are in still look really good. It's like a moving comic book, without it being a moving comic book. I can't really say the same thing to the character models. While they have their designs that look great, the faces though don't, as they don't have moving eyes or mouths. Venom, Carnage, and the symbiote monsters are the only ones that have a moving mouth. Spider-Man doesn't have the black outlines on his costume. It doesn't bother me too much, but if you want it to be accurate to the design, then that is a problem. After the release of the game on the PlayStation, which was done by Neversoft, who did the Tony Hawk series, the game would be later on ported to other platforms around that time, like the Nintendo 64, the PC, and the Sega Dreamcast. Starting off with the first port being the Nintendo 64, which this port was done by Edge Reality. This port is a bit of a downgrade. The graphics are a little bit of a downgrade as textures are more blurry on the N64 than on the PlayStation. The pre-rendered cutscenes aren't even in this port, as they use screenshots and text to tell what's going on in the story, which is very disappointing. The music is also a downgrade, but I'll talk about the music later. The next port is the Sega Dreamcast, done by Treyarch, who are well known in the Spider-Man community for making the video game adaptations to the Sam Raimi movies, Ultimate Spider-Man the 2005 game, and Spider-Man Web of Shadows. This is by far the best looking version of the game. They basically added new looking textures and even new looking models, like they added fingers. Venom looks even better in this port than on the PlayStation, although looking at Spidey in some parts is a bit weird. Mainly his mask, seeing as I was used to how his mask looked in the PlayStation version. The next and final port is on the PC, done by LTI Grey Matter. It looks pretty much like the Dreamcast port just slapped onto PC, and somehow the game got a lower score on PC by critics. I guess they thought it was a lazy port, or it didn't handle well? I don't know. There's also a Game Boy Color version of the game that was released around the same time as the PlayStation version, done by Vicarious Visions. They would later on develop the game's sequel. I'll talk about that later. So in conclusion, the graphics are pretty good, but the best looking version of course is the Sega Dreamcast version. Well done Treyarch, you've done another good thing for the Spider-Man games. The music in this game is a bit repetitive and sometimes forgettable. Then again, most of the music in this game are on repeat. There's a lot of rock in the music and sometimes it sounds like it uses fake instruments. I kind of think that's true sometimes. That isn't a good thing as, again, it can make the music sound repetitive. The Nintendo 64's version of the game sounds a bit worse, but not by too much though. Overall, Spider-Man 2000 is a pretty great game still to this day. I never have a problem going back to this game, mainly because of childhood, but I still find this game to be pretty fun each time I play it. I've never completed the game, but I am pretty close to someday getting there. It happened to Sonic Heroes, so it can happen to this game. As I mentioned before, this game got a sequel a year later done by Vicarious Visions, who did the Game Boy Color version of the first game, Along with the newly released Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, it's basically the same game as the first one, but with a different story and locations and characters. The sequel wasn't ported onto the PC and 64 or the Sega Dreamcast, but it was meant to be originally but got scrapped. They even had to re-release the game after an event that took place, which I won't mention, but most people will know what I'm talking about. That game will be saved for another day. Anyways, so the first 3D Spider-Man game is pretty good still. I recommend this to any fan of the Spider-Man series. If you're a beginner gamer and want to give Spider-Man games a shot, I suggest starting with this game. I would say the 2D games before this one and the ones after this game, but nobody cares about those games. A great start in the 3D world for our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. So, we have now covered 2 games in this marathon. But we are not done yet, because we still have 2 more games left to do. So, join me next time on SpeedForce Game Reviews, where I'll be looking at the 2006 movie tie-in game to the Pixar movie of the same name, Cars. Till then, take care everybody.